Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay. Never comes again, another day like yesterday. Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.
Good morning, everybody. It's a overcast morning in Santa Monica. It's kind of nice. It was pretty cold riding in. And I want to do an episode about boundaries. Boundaries is one of my favorite topics because boundaries is a combination of a very concrete, helpful subject in which you can model behaviors, you can role play, you can begin to work on concrete, assertive dialogue. There's something to grab onto and practice that isn't just about emotional evolution and learning to love yourself and, some of these more frustrating things that therapists go on about that you can't just talk your way into or out of. So boundaries have a nice concrete area of behavior that you can get into. But at the same time, boundaries pull in all of the psychological and emotional underpinnings. And in fact, in my opinion, also pull in a lot of the spiritual realities that I've been talking through. In the last 3 or 4 sessions I did, or episodes, I did the anatomy of consciousness, the role of consciousness on this earth, part 1, 2, and 3. And a lot of that had to do with judgment. And I won't go back and review, otherwise I end up spending half an hour just reviewing what I said before. You can go check out those episodes. But the essential fact, something as sure as gravity remains, that if you judge yourself, if you have judgment of self, if you don't, or let's say it in a more positive way, if you don't know who and what you are, if you don't know the beauty and strength and presence of who and what you are, you're left with no option other than to judge other people. Because other people are going to be certain types of animals, spiritual presence, whatever, and some of them are going to have behaviors that are really problematic for you that may inflict pain and suffering. And when we suffer pain at the hands of other people or other situations, there are 2 assumptions we can make. Either we can go, I'm weak and faulty, and this hurts me, but it shouldn't hurt me, and it wouldn't hurt other people. Or we can say, these are some shitty, bad people, or this is a shitty, bad situation that shouldn't exist, and that's why it causes me pain. The only reason I'm in pain is because something that is happening that's not supposed to happen. And this episode really is about a healthier version of boundaries, one that maybe a lot of times even therapists don't think about or don't talk about. Because many of us perceive boundaries as something, even though we may talk about it in an assertive sense, we still think of it as a defense of self, which still comes from fear and judgment, right? If I need to defend myself and stop someone from doing something to me, then either that could mean that I'm weak or it could mean that they're a bad person. That's 2 sides of the same coin, right? And so often when people do boundary work, let me give you a concrete example. Let's say you work in a situation and one of your colleagues is just much more outgoing, a little bit more direct, and they think they're pretty funny. And so they'll make jokes. Maybe something like, oh, John's got a deadline. We'll see how that works out. Maybe sort of a slightly critical or just sort of a playing with what my personality is. That's not my personality. I'm compulsive about meeting deadlines, but whatever. This colleague just sort of plays with your reality and jokes about it and hints and implies to other people that maybe you're not up to the task, and they're like, I'm joking, I'm kidding, you do a great job. And that annoys the shit out of you. It feels judgmental. And then maybe even other people who don't really understand that person's personality start going, oh, I didn't realize you had a problem with deadlines. Can we help you out? Do you need some help meeting this deadline? We don't want you to get into trouble. So now it really starts to piss you off. Not only is this jackass playing with your reality, making something true about you that's not true, but other people who are even well-intended are picking up on it and talking to you as if it's true, right? And so this makes you really angry. Now, as a therapist, I can tell you what that person is doing, that colleague is doing, definitely comes from a wounded ego and comes from this instinct to play with other people and to jokingly put definitions on other people that don't really serve them and don't match them. And so if you perceive that as inappropriate behavior, you would be correct. There are cases where we can joke and just totally make cartoons of one another. If you hear a bunch of guys sit around, they'll say the most brutal things ever to one another. And it's proof of the love and the trust, right? For the most part, guys don't get offended. Close friends, buddies don't get offended by one another, like saying the most outrageous things, because they know that it's outrageous, because they know that that person saying it knows it's not true and nobody else thinks it's true. And you're just playing around with cartoonish, asinine, hilarious perceptions of one another, right? And so we don't want to get into that scenario where we hypersensitize everything. Anything someone says is inappropriate and is passive aggressive, and they have a poor self-esteem and blah, blah, blah. It's like, that's not always true. Sometimes we do play with the perception of one another. And all you need to know is if the other person is uncomfortable with you playing with the perception of them or making a cartoonish, that's all you need to know is like, well, they're not comfortable with it. They don't have that level of trust with me. And so that's it. I respect it. I apologize for offending you. Right. And so we get into trouble with that situation. But to come back to the conversation of judgment, what that colleague is doing in a work environment, that sort of buddy joking probably isn't appropriate. It doesn't really help anything. I don't know of any work situation where you can be that enmeshed and really joke the way I might joke with my brothers, sisters, right? We say outrageous things about one another. But then it's okay as long as you know that the other person doesn't actually think that that's true. But that's probably never appropriate in a work situation because you're really just trying to keep the cogs running. A little bit of light humor really helps, but for the most part, you don't want to get too enmeshed and too deep into it. So what that person is doing is inappropriate. And so now the receiver of that behavior is in this state where it's like, okay, what do I do? Do I go, well, there's something wrong with me, or I should be able to handle this. Why am I so angry? And why do I go home and stew over this for weeks on end? And, why is this so difficult for me? And it seems like other people are fine. They know that he's inappropriate, but it doesn't really bother them. And why does it bother me? So either I have to judge me, which makes me feel weak, and I start comparing myself to other people, and I start deciding that there's something that's normal and that I'm not, and this is my trauma, and I need to go to therapy, and right, so I'm sitting in judgment of self, or as often likely, we're just a hot flame and in a moral rage that this other person is such an asshole and so inappropriate, and also, how can the people around me allow this? And why doesn't anybody else stand up and say something? And, what's going on with the leadership that they allow such a thing? Well, those are certainly reasonable questions to ask if you're in a neutral state, but you can see the tone with which I'm asking it is coming from this hurt where I either have to judge myself or I have to judge the whole situation, all the people in the situation, and this jerk. And even if we can rightly say, yeah, that person unconsciously probably does that, they take a little bit too much ownership of other people's reality because they're trying to distract from their own, which means unconsciously they probably have some discomfort, some identity discomfort, some shame that they walk around with as a body state. And they've probably since childhood escaped it by joking and making jokes about other people. That's true. Now, I can say that theoretically, I'm in a neutral state. I'm not really judging that person. There's just an understanding that, yeah, that's probably true, right? But the person who's hurt by it is attempting to judge them, is now doing it for the same reason that the person jokes about them. They're trying to equalize something. The hurt person is, you've got the two sides of the same coin. If I'm judging the other person, it's also an attempt to escape the judgment of myself, that I'm weak and that other people are okay with it, or other people are more assertive and they would know how to handle it. And so you get into this binary situation. And I shared my own version of it in a long form episode. The one, I think it was The Purpose of Consciousness on This Earth, Part 1, where I talked about the fact that I had problems in relationships where I would very quietly assume people would behave. I would create relationships with people who didn't have the moral awareness that I had. They had other skills that made them beautiful people and other ways in which I was blind that I could learn from them. But in that way, they didn't have a strong moral sense. They were sort of amoral or even immoral in many significant ways. And I would create relationships with them and then place myself in a morally superior position, if only in my head, because that assuaged my wounded ego and my low self-esteem, right? And so even at a quiet level, I engaged in that. So people are engaging in this binary system that they're trapped in, where either I'm trying to escape my own shaming by deciding this other person is a horrible person and being in judgment of them, even if we're right on the surface of it, we're right that they have a wounded ego and this is probably inappropriate, but the anger, like the sense of superiority that we're trying to establish, is an indication that I also feel that I'm weak and that I feel ashamed and I'm trying to elevate myself. So I'm engaging in the same game they are. So I'm meeting them energy for energy, which doesn't help me or them. So to bring it back to boundaries, you can work on boundaries with a therapist. Most therapists are pretty good at this. I really enjoy this work. I love language and I love dialogue, and I've spent so much time reading and working on dialogue and working on how people speak to one another as a teacher of young people, and doing my own work, that I've developed a certain level of expertise with it. I really enjoy it. And there's the mechanical version of, rather than the person, once they try to defend themselves in that situation, being like, oh, so who are you? So what are you, dude? You think you can just sit there and joke around about me? Like, you're completely inappropriate and this should never happen. I don't know what's wrong with you, but when you have an angry conversation with that colleague, a therapist can model for you, hey, so-and-so, I'm really not comfortable with how much you play with perceptions around me and they're really not accurate. I know you think you're joking or you intend it as a joke, but I'm not okay with it and I would appreciate it if you stopped. Right? That would be the first assertive dialogue. And then if they don't stop, then it needs to become more firm. Hey, I've spoken to you about this before. I'm not asking anymore. Stop joking about me. At this point, I kind of dislike you. I'll be collegial with you and we can work together because that's our situation and I'm professional and you're professional, but I'm not interested in you joking around me. Even if you don't understand, stop making jokes about me. I don't appreciate it. Boom, right? They continue and even become more It's almost like because you said no, they turn into a little boy who just has to keep going. Then at some point you have to elevate that message, and you have to make sure that you're saying it in front of people. Hey, I've spoken to you about this multiple times. I don't appreciate the jokes. I don't care how you intend it. It needs to stop now. And you need to start doing it in front of people so that the entire social situation is aware that you're not comfortable with their behavior. Okay, so I can talk you through that. Many therapists can talk you through that. But interestingly, the way you intend it or the energy it comes from can make it very difficult or very easy to do. One energy is, oh, well, your therapist or a friend or somebody or maybe even a colleague talked you through, and you figured out the dialogue and you practice the dialogue and you begin practicing assertive dialogue with this person to set a boundary. But it's still coming from this hurt, judgmental place, judgmental of this binary place, judgmental of self, judgmental of others. And so without going on too much longer, I want to posit for you a message that's both psychological and spiritual of where a healthy boundary really comes from. To leave that binary system where either I have to sit in judgment of someone else, even if other people jumped in and defended me and told this person, hey, your behavior is not normal, now it can be quite likely that I now have hidden my own self-judgment, my feeling that I'm not strong enough to handle the situation. And so that's now hidden, and I now have built in this feeling that I need these other people to defend me. And I can't really assert myself, and I don't have the skill set. And so that judgment is still there, but now I'm dependent on other people defending me, which is sometimes appropriate, right? You don't want to get too black and white. There are situations where it's appropriate to go to a colleague or to go to a superior and say, hey, I'm uncomfortable with this situation. I don't like how this person talks to me. I've spoken to them in private, respectfully. It doesn't seem to stop. I need some backup here. That can be appropriate, but let's keep it a little bit simpler just for this conversation. Even if other people jump in, there's a tendency for that to leave me weakened if I don't internalize a sense of self-respect and self-love. So let's come to the real point of where a healthy boundary comes from. If I understand, so I'm going to pull in some esoteric stuff. I'm reading a book. Oh man, I'm not even going to remember it. Something about waves in the cosmic sea, how everyday life results from the waves of the cosmic sea, something like that. Anyway, I just started reading this book. And it said something that I really, really enjoy. We're talking about at the level of quantum physics, right? Everything is an excitation on a field. Everything is a presentation of energy. And even what we consider mass, what we consider solid objects aren't solid objects. They're presentations of excitations or energetic events on a field that then present in a way that creates its own field, and you get enough of those particles put together, and then you get atoms put together that maintain this field that may or may not mesh with other fields. In most cases doesn't, right? I can't put my hand through the screen of the computer. Don't stand in front of a speeding bus because solids are an experience that matters, right? Our perception of a thing as solid matters. But what quantum physics is bearing out is that everything is a presentation of energy. It presents as what we perceive as a solid, but what this guy said was a point that I really liked. It was something like, I'm paraphrasing, you are not just living in the cosmos, you are of the cosmos. There's no difference between the energetic, the excitement on a field that makes up the quantum particles that make up your cells, there's no difference from that and the stars and the concrete and a turtle and some alien being and whatever, all of it. It's the same thing, and you are of it. Sorry, guys, I'm a little slow this morning, and I lost the thread of what my point, because we were talking about boundaries. Boundaries and energy. And so you can take something esoteric like that, or it's science, but when I'm pulling it into psychology and spirituality, it becomes a bit more esoteric, is that everything is energy. And if you truly know yourself, you are composed of an energetic presentation with certain limitations and certain things that are beautiful and powerful and wonderful, but also those powerful and wonderful things within this incarnation, within this personality, within this set of experiences, within this biological makeup, within the whole thing. There are also limitations, right? You are a specific individual thing. You cannot be a specific individual presentation of energy and be able to accommodate and interact with every single other type of thing, right? Now, I'm saying it in a vague way, but if I take you and I put you in the middle of the sun, that's not going to work out well for you. You can interact with it, but you're going to cease to be whatever this is, right? A more violent image, if someone, takes a shotgun and puts it against the back of your head and pulls the trigger, your head and your being as we know it here and now, and this personality and your opportunities to continue to play out this life are done. It's over, right? So by definition, to be an individual and have a specific personality and way of being is really a way of saying that in the whole field of all energetic possibilities that make up the universe, known or otherwise, we are each extremely limited, but also very beautiful in what we are as an individual, because those limits are what create us as a specific individual beautiful thing, right? So if you take a Lamborghini is not a bulldozer. Oh, I'd love to have a Lamborghini. You look at those things and the care and the love and the attention to aesthetics and power and how beautifully, mechanically, the elegance of that internal combustion machine, it's amazing. But you're screwed if you're going to try to pave a road with it, right? It is its own specific individual thing. And to appreciate it and love it, you have to know what it is. And if you really want to clear a field to build a house, you're not going to appreciate a Lamborghini at all. At all. And if you have this massive, beautiful racetrack with a really cool set of turns, et cetera, you're going to yearn for a Lamborghini. But if all you have is a tractor or a dump truck, or even worse, a tank, you're going to hate it, because that tank is going to destroy that track and destroy your ability to even hope to have an experience that a Lamborghini would give you, right? So the point is, again, this draws in the spiritual as well as, quantum physics, which is beginning to meld, in my opinion, at this point. The point is, if to get away from this binary system where I either have to judge the other person or I have to judge myself, and even if I set assertive boundaries that sound neutral and assertive, it can still come from this hurt place that's really that binary system of either you're a piece of crap or I'm a piece of crap. If we really look at what's created here, everything is an energetic presentation, depending on how a particle, right, what position it assumes. As I understand, it's even things that a particle can do can be called different colors, colorations, whatever. Like, there's a loss of language to describe the weirdness at the quantum level of what reality is doing or what things are doing, but essentially it's all presentations of energy and what energy is doing, right? So you take whatever energy is doing that makes up you, and whatever energy is doing that makes up somebody else, and what energy is doing that makes up a rock. And it's like, I made this point in, The Purpose of Consciousness on This Earth, I think part 1 or 2. It's like, I like rocks, but I'm not going to take one and hit myself in the head with it, because a rock is a particular presentation of an excitation on a field, an accumulation of things that are excitations on a field that have assumed a certain position and a certain way of being, a certain energetic presentation, that if it interacts energetically with my head, I'm no longer going to get to exist and to present as a particular and specific energy, right? You can't use a tank to race on a racetrack, and you can't use a Lamborghini to clear a minefield. That's not a judgment of either one of those things. We don't have to be angry at either one of those things. We don't have to judge either one. Both of those things are beautiful. They just, once we allow the field, right, the field in which energy creates excitations or is in an energetic state or assumes a position, once that differentiates and you have me as a discrete set of energetic presentations and someone else as a discrete set of energetic presentations and my bike as a discrete set of energetic presentations, once that happens, once it divides out and presents as all of these different, maybe infinitely varied types of realities and ways of being, we get into a situation where some of those energetic things don't go together. And that's not a judgment of either thing, right? So that's the point I'm trying to make. So bring this back into maybe a spiritual or maybe a psychological situation. What we're saying is, if you understand that you are the field from which all energy presents, all excitation happens, and that once excitation happens, you have taken on a form, a specific form with specific ways of being and specific ways of interacting, and there are certain types of energy that are not good for you, that no longer allow you to thrive as what you are and no longer allow you to exist in this particular form, the sun, or put me in a crematorium. It's not going to work out for me, right? However people are cremated after they pass away, it's like if you put someone in there alive, they're going to cease to be whatever this individual creation is, right? This experiment in consciousness. If you understand that that's what you are and that that's how each of us presents and that there's nothing to judge, there's just some energies we shouldn't interact with, you can just go, you develop a love and a joy that it's like, oh, this is what I'm doing right now. This is how I present and I thrive in certain ways. And any judgment of that is just a confusion over what I am and the beauty of the infinite number of ways that life expresses. Life creates itself and explores itself by interacting as an individual presentation of an excitation or an accumulation of excitations. Once you accept that, you can just go, I have no need to submit myself to energetic presentations that don't work for me. I don't have to judge the sun. I don't have to judge a rock. Those things can be wonderful if I just accept what they are and who they are, right? You take that colleague who is always kind of making those jokes and always playing with the, blah, blah, blah. And let's say you have a big company dinner and nobody wants to get up and give a half-hour presentation or introduce all of the speakers or whatever. You may find that that guy is like really good at it. And when he's being present and thinks about it and he's been honored with this, position of being the person who introduces everybody, he tells some pretty funny jokes and even tells a funny joke that pokes fun at the CEO, but that really works because the CEO has a lot of power and has a sense of humor. And you may find like, oh, this guy really works in certain situations. It's just that in my work situation, with the way I work and the way I think and the emotional states that I'm in while I'm working, I don't appreciate that kind of boundary crossing to play with my internal state or to play with the perception of who and how I am. So then I can just go, right? Instead of being like, either he's a jerk or I'm overly sensitive, you can just go, oh, that doesn't work for me. I can appreciate that there's something beautiful about him and maybe he is trying to work out some unconscious pain. Well, we all are. No judgment. Then I can set a boundary from a completely different place, right? Hey, brother, like you're really funny. I like your jokes, and I can see that they're met with love and affection. They don't really work for me. I get a little uncomfortable, and it gets harder for me to focus. Could you do me a favor and just like don't do that with me? Like I get it. I get your personality. You're a funny dude. It would be fun to have beers with you over lunch and maybe joke, but please don't do it in the work situation. Do you hear the difference? You can hear the difference. Even when we model assertive language, hey, excuse me, I'm not comfortable with you joking about my reality and sort of implying these things, like however you mean it, that's your business, but I would appreciate it if you would stop. Okay, that's assertive language. Anybody, right, can look at that and go, oh, that's assertive language, and that's maybe there's some assertiveness training and blah, blah, blah. But you can still hear that it comes from a place of judgment and fear. Right? It still comes from a place of judgment and fear. And he's going to feel judged, and he's either going to go away hurt, or, right, which makes it more difficult for him. So now your energy is now impacting him negatively. Or if he's pretty unconscious, he's going to come back, pick more. He's going to do the little boy thing where it's like, oh, or he's going to try to prove that what he's doing is wrong and really you're just too sensitive, and he's going to keep telling jokes and that's not going to work out. Well, it's going to become a toxic situation. But if you understand what's true, a real boundary you feel totally entitled to. You don't feel ashamed. You feel totally entitled to. You know why? Because a true boundary does not judge the other person, and it doesn't judge you either. It knows what's true. Let's review what's true. What's true is, at the quantum level, there's a field, I don't know what it is, but all that means is there's a space in which there's I don't know how else to use the language. There's a space in which energy occurs. And everything is an occurrence of an energy. I'm taking this phrase from my brother, who's a quantum physicist or a nuclear physicist. When I asked him, how many times can you break a particle in half? It's never going to end mathematically. You can cut something in half forever. When are they ever going to get it? He was like, no, that's not what it is. Actually, everything we already know, everything's an excitation on a field, right? Okay, so everything's an excitation on a field. Everything is an energetic presentation. Everything is energy decaying into a posture, a coloration, a position, however quantum physics, they create a language to try to describe something that our brains aren't that good at thinking, right? So those are not literal things that it literally is a color or literally is a position, right? So there's that space in which it happens. And then there are all of these energetic presentations. And by definition, if you want individual things to be individual discrete things, that thing has to have an accumulation of positions and energetic presentations. Some result in my heart, some result in my brain, some result in my glasses, some result in, blah, blah, blah. And all this comes together in a vaguely loose coalition that holds together well enough that I get to have a lifespan and I get to explore what it is to be conscious. Now, in my opinion, what I really am is consciousness. I'm not the energetic presentations because I'm not my body, I'm not my brain, I'm not my mind, I'm not even the energy. I'm probably the field under, well, I'm consciousness, which is maybe not even the field under it. But now you're getting into the territory of spiritual leaders, gurus, whatever. I'll leave that to them to explain. And by the way, what they explain tracks with physics, but we won't get into that. That's a whole nother conversation. Once you know the truth of who and what you are, that if there's anything that doesn't work for you, there's absolutely nothing wrong with just being like, that doesn't work for me. Hey, dude, we're all going to go take a visit to the center of the sun. You want to go? Yeah, that's not going to work for me. My ability to thrive would immediately cease, and I would no longer get to explore from this particular incarnation, this particular accumulation of energetic presentations. And I want to be alive and conscious, and I want to have these experiences. So not doing it. Let's use something a little bit more pedestrian, introverts versus extroverts. I'm extremely introverted. I'm very social, but extremely introverted. When I hit the wall, I'm done, hard done. Got nothing left to say. There's no words left. I'm out. I need to go be by myself, and I could be on my own for long periods of time compared to other people. And I thrive on it. You can be like, you know what? There's this whole house festival where a bunch of people have rented warehouses in downtown LA, and it's just going to be these slamming bass beats that just hit you in the chest all night long. It's starting at 10 and it's going to go to 4 in the morning, and this is going to go on for a week, and I signed us up for it. Let's do it. We're going to drink and party and dance. Hey, man. 2 hours of that on one night, I'm done. Done. Maybe I'll push myself for the second night just to hang out with my friends. But that's it. I'm going to build in an exit. I'm going to drive myself. I'm going to make sure that people understand. I'm going to tell them in advance, hey, it's nothing personal. I love you guys. But there's no way that my nervous system, I'm going to be in misery. And at some point I'll dissociate. It's so much stimulation and overstimulation. I'm not ashamed of my nervous system. It also makes me very, very sensitive and aware to subtle patterns in social behaviors and in business and in numbers. I see things that other people don't see. Whatever, it has its own strengths and it has its own weaknesses. I don't care. Sometimes I do, right? I was raised with some internalized shame. So there's a case where it's like, you don't need to apologize for being this particular presentation. There are going to be strengths and beauty about it, but by definition, because you are not everything, you're not every presentation, you're not a car, and you're not that extrovert, and you're not this other thing, or maybe you are the extrovert, right? So maybe you miss some social cues and you have a friend who's an introvert who's like, hey, dude, you stepped on those people's toes a little bit. I think they were a little offended. Like, oh my God, what did I say? Whatever, it doesn't matter. Because whatever you are, there's going to be energetic situations that are good for you, that are neutral for you. There are going to be energetic situations that are challenging, that you should push yourself just to expand your boundaries. And there are going to be situations where it's like, no, don't do that. Don't. And don't shame yourself that there are some people that that's good for. I don't even know if Wall Street's the same thing, but just from movies, you see these images in the stock exchange, people down in the pit screaming, sell, and hand signals, blah, blah, blah. I would lose my fucking mind within 30 seconds. I couldn't even be in that room. No, there's no way. I'm a musician. I love music. You know, in my childhood, I went to two concerts with friends, two. Even though that would have been something that I would have loved so much. And the reason was because I was growing up in the 70s and 80s when they still hadn't really learned how dangerous volume was, and they were not starting to see the hearing damage to rock stars and people who regularly went to concerts. And my sense of hearing, my ears are so sensitive that it literally, I get shooting, stabbing pains in my ears and down into my neck at those volumes. It doesn't matter. It's not personal. I went to only, even though I love music, I went to only two concerts because they were so painful and uncomfortable to be at. Other people, crank it up, man. It's so fucking exciting. They're having so much fun. I don't judge them. They have a different kind of a nervous system with different beauty. This is much more resilient. They can do things that I can't do, but also they don't perceive things that I perceive because my nervous system is highly sensitive to certain subtleties in the environment. And sometimes that matters and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I'm pointing out subtleties and it's like, who gives a shit, dude? Nobody cares. You're the only one who cares. You perceive it, but it doesn't really impact anybody or do anything. And that's sometimes true too. And sometimes it really, really matters. And I'm the one seeing it. And then it's hard to get people to listen, but whatever. So you become a therapist so that people will listen. Kidding. Half kidding. So that's a more pedestrian sort of example. But the point is, it's not, you don't need to judge anybody. Just you inhabit this energetic presentation that as a specific individual has a certain way of being. And you need to protect what's beautiful about it. But to protect what's beautiful about it, you only need to know what's beautiful about it. So then boundaries become about love and appreciation and knowledge. You have to know who and what you are and how you present in this nervous system, in this incarnation, in this particular specific presentation of energy, and how it interacts with everything else, this infinite amount of everything else. You have to know you and love you. Because then you're not going to judge. It's just like, that's not good for me. That colleague who's always talking shit and joking about everybody and making a cartoon out of everybody, not my thing. But then I can go to that guy with love and respect. Hey man, I bet you're like a really good presenter that can get the whole room roaring. You have such a skill with like taking these things and turning them into cartoonish, like what, and it's all meant with love. If I could be direct with you in the work environment, I really don't like it. It actually throws me off, and I get distracted from what I'm doing. So if you could help me out, just please don't do it with me. But I get what it is. I really like it. That's a completely different boundary. It's one that far more likely that other person can hear it and not feel judged and actually feel love for you and get feedback and be able to create more flexibility in what sounds like kind of a compulsive knee-jerk response to situations. Maybe he's coming from a little anxiety himself, but he will get a chance to heal and to see what's beautiful about him, but also see the limitations of it and also learn himself. When you come from that place where you're like, I'm not judging myself and I'm not judging you, I'm just talking about the some energies don't work together and we can both exist and be really beautiful. That is an entirely different thing. That's a boundary. That's what a boundary is. A boundary is not judgment of yourself. And I have to defend myself because I have a weakness in this way. No, you don't. If you want to work on something, if you want to work on expanding your boundaries, great, that's great. But it doesn't mean anything is wrong with you. And it also doesn't mean anything's wrong with the other person. one caveat with this model. There are people who behave in ways that definitely comes from deep, deep pain, disconnection from self, people who are cruel. Like, let's go to the extreme. Someone who runs a concentration camp during a war, who tortures and who rapes and who like inflicts extreme suffering and pain on other beings, you have a right to your discernment of like, oh man, this person is deeply, deeply unconscious, is disconnected from love for themselves, love of others, what life really is, how beautiful it is, how fragile it is, that there's no way to know it without loving it and wanting it to thrive. So you can discern where that person is, but if you start judging them, if you start putting yourself in a godlike position of like, they're evil and they deserve everything that they've ever done, they deserve to come back to them 1,000 times over, and blah, blah, blah. Okay, if you're in that position, the reason that's not healthy for you, it's true that that person is coming from a deeply unconscious state, but it's also true if you're in that position of judging them, that you believe that any infliction of harm and their attempt to inflict shame and misery on you can mean something about you, and it can't. So you're still confused about you. You may be suffering terrible pain and misery. Let's say you're in that prison camp and you're filthy and your hair is falling out from lack of nutrition and you've lost tons of weight, you're skeletal and you're staggering and you're so desperately hungry and miserable and you're in terrible pain. It's true that other person's unconsciousness is doing really painful things to your energetic presentation. How your energy presents and assumes a position and creates this individual thing, which actually includes your brain and your body and your biology and all this stuff is going on. You're no longer in a position where you can thrive. Your ability to thrive and express as an individual expression of life is being severely muted, and it may be ended by this experience. That's true. But you are not your body. You are not your brain. So you can be in pain and misery. But if you feel humiliated, and if you don't know that you're beautiful, you will then put yourself in a godlike position and judge the unconscious person who's inflicting all that pain. You have a right to do whatever you can. If you happen to be able to get a loaded gun and end that person, I think, they're creating an environment in which they're suppressing other living beings' ability to thrive, and they're doing it out of their own unconsciousness. And whatever happens, happens, right? You live by the sword, you die by the sword. This is just physics. This is just the way human events happen. This is the psychology. This is just the social physics of how the human condition works. If you accumulate and generate tons of pain and suffering, sooner or later that crashes back on you and it ends you. It just is, that's how it works. If you create it, you exist in it. If you create it, you exist in it. So even in that extreme situation, not judging people doesn't mean that you don't have a right to the discernment of, oh, this is an incredibly unconscious person who's inflicting terrible pain and suffering and limiting other living beings' ability to thrive and to explore their own conscious presentation in this energetic, right, container. But if you get into judgment, it means you believe that you could be shamed or sullied or dirtied or destroyed. Let's say that person tortures you to death. You are consciousness. You're not the energy. You're not the energetic presentation showing up as organs and hearts and right? Again, I don't have time to go through all that, but that's true by logic, that you're not your brain, you're not your arm, you're not your voice, you're not your beliefs. These are all things that get layered on top of consciousness. You are conscious awareness. Go back and listen to the episode about the anatomy of consciousness, right? So I talked through all the logic of that, how consciousness is not these things, these energetic presentations, and you're probably also not the field in which it happens. Maybe you are. I don't know what consciousness is, but whatever it is, it seems to defy all of these presentations. It seems to be a thing that is the only true and real thing, but also is not part of all of the presentation. The creation that comes out of consciousness is not what consciousness is. Consciousness is the thing that creates. Whatever, I'm getting off into that stuff. So we come back to boundaries. You can practice assertive language. This is really good. It's really healthy. Do it. I love that stuff. I love role playing it. I love thinking it through because I love language and I love seeing how different energies get created by different ways of saying things. And if you're still at the stage of feeling judgmental of the other person or judgmental of self, and your dialogue sounds like something like, excuse me, I need a conversation. I'm not comfortable or interested in how you joke about me. However you mean it is not my business. I would appreciate it if you stop. That's an assertive boundary. It still comes from the need to defend and to stop a behavior. And so in subtle ways, don't worry, like you don't have to become some spiritual guru. If that's where you're at, and I'm often at that place myself, fine, no problem. Just know that a true boundary comes out of a deep love and acceptance of self, a knowledge of what you are, that you cannot be besmirched, you cannot be shamed, you cannot be damaged, you cannot be twisted, right? Any sense of twisting is just happening to the biology or happening to the energy presentation. That as individual presentations of energy, there are other energies with which we're not a mix. It's an uncomfortable mix. And you have a right to go, oh, I love me. Maybe I love you, maybe I don't know you, but I know that this doesn't work. I know this doesn't work, okay? That's a true boundary where you can tell that colleague, man, you're really funny. Like you have a really quick wit. It seems like you developed that over a long time. I bet you're really good at entertaining and giving presentations and lightening up the crowd and whatever. I'm not into it. It's really distracting for me. I'm a particular type of person that doesn't work well for me, and it's much harder to do my job. So I would appreciate it. I like how you are. It would be fun to have beers with you and joke around, but I would appreciate it if you stopped that completely within the work environment. Completely different energy. That energy is alchemizing. It takes that binary system where either I have to judge and suppress the other person, or I have to judge and suppress myself, or feel confused and go back and forth and back and forth. It alchemizes that into a third space, a much larger space in which different energetic things can happen. And one of the energetic things that can happen is you knowing truly what you are and knowing that this is only a presentation of energy, and you're not the presentation of energy. You're the consciousness that inhabits it and experiences it. That you have a right to care for this energetic presentation, and that sometimes it doesn't work with other energetic presentations, and that you can love them. I love a rock. I don't want one bashing me in the head. I love the sun. I don't want to get on a rocket and shoot myself into the middle of it. It doesn't work for my thriving. You get to pursue your thriving. And when other people have energies that impinge on your thriving, you don't have to hate them or attack them or judge them and be like, well, they should or should not. No, there's no should or should not. Just some energies don't work well together within whatever this is. If it impinges on your thriving, just tell them it impinges on my thriving. You don't use that language. They're not going to understand what you're talking about, right? You have alchemized. You've gone from this binary two-dimensional system into a larger system in which there's more space to allow the other person and allow you, and to love the other person and allow you, or to love whatever it is, and to know, I love that thing, but it does not allow me to thrive. I'm going to move on and I'm going to go over here and I'm going to thrive. And I'm going to love you from a distance, or I'm not even going to make my life about you. Whatever, you thrive, go do you, right? That's a real boundary. That's a real boundary. To truly know who and what you are, to truly know who and what someone else is or something else is. I truly know what a rock is, or at least I know how it presents. And I know that its energetic presentation, and it is energy, it might be inanimate, but it has particles that have energetically assumed a position or a coloration that present in a certain way that result in a certain density and weight, that presents in a way as a solid that if it then energy moves it and it has momentum and then it comes in contact with the inertia of my head, the things are not going to work out well for me. I don't have to hate a rock to know that, right? So the same is true with all of this stuff. You can alchemize these things. A true boundary alchemizes a situation. Sometimes there are people who are so deeply unconscious that even if you offer the alchemizing of the situation, they continue to behave the way they behave. And there are other conversations to have, and there are other choices, which sometimes if there's someone who's that insistent on putting their energy on you, you choose to leave that situation, or you choose to do things that may result in that person being removed, if that's possible, depending on what the culture of the social situation is. So there are all of these ways in which we practice being who we are in this reality, in the infinite number of ways that we can encounter other energetic presentations. We don't have control of the outcomes, but if you always stayed grounded in knowing truly what and who you are and how your energy presents, and loving it, loving that this is what you're doing right now for this incarnation, this life, and knowing that that's what other people are doing, you can interact with them in a way that lovingly and respectfully communicates, that energy doesn't work for me. My energy may not work for you. I get it. I don't judge you. That can truly alchemize a situation. That is a boundary based in what is actually, factually, scientifically true about what's going on here, about who and what you are and who and what other people, objects, things, situations are. And that is when you achieve freedom. Boundaries, real boundaries, are not just about practicing assertive language. That's a really good step. It's very important. I love those conversations. I enjoy it. But real boundaries are truly knowing who you authentically and what you authentically are, both as a conscious awareness, but also as how you have presented energetically and what the limitations and the beauty and strengths of your presentation are. Knowing what that is, loving what that is, and then allowing other people to know and love what they are or be confused about what they are. And then just getting to choose without judgment what I interact with and what I don't, if there's any choice available. Sometimes the only choice is how I choose to respond to something or how I choose to feel about something. That's a true boundary. And that boundary is about freedom. It expresses freedom, right? So going back to the intro of this episode, saying that the reason I like the conversation around boundaries is because it's so specific, psychological, language oriented, it's concrete, you can practice it. But when you really get into it, it flowers, it opens out into who and what you truly are spiritually, or just scientifically maybe, what this reality really is, what we're doing here, but most importantly, how to interact with other beings, without judging, because the moment we judge, it means I have forgotten who I am and I've forgotten who and what they are. And when we forget who and what we are, we lose love, we lose creativity, we lose presence. Most importantly, we lose freedom. We impose limitations, not just limitations in this biological reality, but we attempt to limit our conscious awareness. That's what I love about conversations about boundaries. All right, guys, I love you. I will talk to you next time. Have a wonderful day. Take care.
Just for today, everything's okay, everything's okay.